And then I'm going to go ahead and get started with, I'm going to review again part 4.1, 4.2, talk about the pivot tables, how to do it in Excel, and then how to do it in JASP. So are there any questions, comments, or anything like that before we get started? Anything part 3?
Yeah, I have a question for part 3.
Yeah.
So in the recording of the 23rd, you were showing us how to do the median, mean, and mode. And so while I was doing it for me, so I plugged in my mean into the missing age gaps, which is what you were saying to do. So while I was doing that, it said, like you were saying that once you plug it in, that your median should result in the same number as your mean. And for me, it didn't do that. So I don't know what I was doing wrong.
So the values should shift as you impute any missing data points that you have. Sorry, I'm trying to admit somebody here.
Yeah, like the values, they did change, like everything did shift, but it didn't result in the same number as my mean. Like
that's okay. It really, so there's several factors that can affect that. The first one, it could be how many data points you're missing. The other thing, it could be also the standard deviation. So those two things can affect the fact that it might converge to, it should converge to the mean, but it might not converge entirely. But either way, it's okay. You're not really doing anything wrong. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, you're not doing anything wrong. There's several factors in your data set that might affect whether it converges completely or it doesn't converge completely. But as long as you input it with the same value, you're fine.
Okay. Hey, Professor.
Yeah.
On your part 3 instructional videos, it says you like the start of that shows where you go back to like the part 2 PowerPoint and videos. I went there, the PowerPoints are up, but the videos about how to do section 3, like part by part, those aren't, I couldn't find those. Like there was no link to that. It says PowerPoint and videos on the thing, but when you click that link, it's just the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I was having the same problem with that.
And I haven't started part 3 because I'm confused as fuck, or I mean crap, sorry. And then I was trying to find those videos. I looked through your other ones, but they don't explain it like you said they did in those videos you had posted, whatever those were.
So
it was chapter 2 is where you had them posted on that video. And you said it goes through it step by step, and that's exactly what I was looking for, but couldn't find.
Oh, you talk about the Excel files used?
Yeah, because it shows you exactly what's it. Because Professor, I've tried to figure this out by like reading what's written about part 3, but that's not comprehending for me. So no comprehendo. So I need like videos to watch, and those videos weren't available. And
all right. All right, just for the sake. Okay, so you went to the.
Yeah, let me go right to it. Let me go right to it. I'll show you exactly where I went. So if you go to modules, and then once you're on hold on, my stuff's loading. So I go, if you go to part 3 instructions on the instructional videos and you play that clip, you bring up, because I've been on part 2, I've read everything, and then I got to this one and it said, and then I went through your class runs, and this one starts off with you showing us videos about, you see it?
Hold on a second. So in the instructional videos, there are 3 videos that pertain to part 3. Now, I have not renamed some of these. So like it says captions for tables and graphs, and then part 4 instructions. Those are all combined for part 3. Now, you mentioned some files that were.
Yeah, if you go to modules, so I understand what you're saying about those videos, because I looked into those too. But there were particular videos that you had posted up with the PowerPoints, in chapter 2 that you said go over like 3.1 and then 3.2, but they're labeled as like 2.1 and 2.2 since it's under chapter 2. But you said those go over the direct example of like the Excel file and how to do everything on the instructions. That's what your video. I mean, are you getting what I'm saying? Because if you go to module.
I'm a little. I thought. Are you referring to the instructional videos per se? Or
so Professor, when you go, if you listen to like the first 30 to 60 seconds in that part 3 instructions video, in that video you start on chapter 2 and it says section 2.1. Like I don't know how to screenshot with my.
No, that's fine.
But. And then you go through and you literally say this will show you a step-by-step process of how to do the chapter 3 or the section 3 Excel stuff. And then I went to find those videos. So if you go back to just chapter 2 under modules, it pulls up all the PowerPoints and like shows you what you briefly go over in that video, but there's no actual video that you were talking about. And that's what I'm confused about, because that video would be directly related to
yeah. So the videos per se of that should be just the Zoom recordings. So instead of having it in different parts, I just found it easier to sort of just do the Zoom recordings. And so the Zoom recordings and the files within the chapters should be sufficient to sort of allow you to do part 3. And then of course, the part 3 is just a quick video on how to sort of get started. So if you're talking about the 2.1 video and files, the 2.2 video and files, I believe that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, and those files went directly over 3.1, 3.
Yeah, so those are in the Zoom recordings. The modules.
I've watched the Zoom recordings though, and they don't go over every I don't know, maybe I was confused. Maybe I need to just watch them again. But I went from 9/16 to like I think the beginning of October. But like I feel like I'm still missing part of what I still don't understand. Like it doesn't show. I don't know. I can watch them again. I mean.
No, that's okay. So I'll be able to address any question that you might have right now if you want to do that.
No, I really just wanted to know if you had those videos, but I'll figure it out and then I'll let you know.
Well, Timmy, do me a favor. If you have like a screenshot or something like that, go ahead and just message me, and then maybe I can address it that way.
I can just take a picture of it on my phone. I have your number. I can just text you.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, you can go ahead and do that. And if I get it, if you send it while I'm going to lecture, I can go ahead and address it at the end. If I don't, if for any reason I kind of miss it or something like that.
You're fine. I'll take a picture. Yeah, I'll just take a video of it now and then I'll show you.
Yeah, that's fine. Are there any other questions or concerns about part 3?
Yes, Professor, I've got a question.
Yeah.
For one of my questions, I believe it's going to be a quantitative question. I just wanted the confirmation before I went through and did all the work and put it in the thing. The question is asking my participants how many guns that they own, and so they have an option of 1 through 5. And so would that be considered a quantitative based on their response? And it's multiple choice. So.
Okay, so when they responded, was it an open-ended question, or were they able to choose like a category, like you said? I think you said it was multiple choice. So were they able to choose 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., or were they able to type in the number of guns that they own?
No, they were able to select 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Unfortunately, this did not have an option for 0, so I'm going to have no responses for the people who either chose not to answer or do not have guns.
Okay, so if they chose a category, the only thing that you're going to get is the number of participants that chose that particular category. So let's say you had the number 4, right? Which relates to 4 guns that they own. So the only thing that you're going to get is the choice 4, and then the number of participants that they have. So that's in essence is a qualitative variable. And the reason it is because they were able to choose from specific categories, and then those would be mutually exclusive, right? So if I own 4 guns, then theoretically I don't own 5 guns, or I don't own 3 guns, I just own 4. So that's actually a qualitative variable.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
The way it was set up. You're welcome.
I had a question regarding regarding when we are talking about qualitative and quantitative. I know that for the qualitative data, you want us to have the ogive and the histogram. But when it comes down to the quantitative data, how many graphs do you want us to have? Just because like these on my side, the only qualitative data will be like the income and the ages, because everything else is just questions. They don't have any numbers whatsoever to them.
Yeah, so you're correct. So the quantitative variables, which will be age and income. So if you go back to what Heather was asking about the number of guns, if she would have left that as an open-ended question, then that question would have been quantitative. And then so quantitative, you do need the ogive, the histogram, and then of course the frequency distribution table. For qualitative, you're not going to have the ogive, because the ogive relates to sort of the accumulation of percentages, if you will. So per se for qualitative, you wouldn't have that. So for qualitative variables, you're welcome to have the table, the frequency distribution table, which you also have the relative in there, or you can just go ahead and do a bar graph if you wish. So that's the one that you have sort of a choice if you want to. But for quantitative, you're going to need those 3 things: ogive, the histogram, and the table, if you will.
So then for qualitative, we can just like, is there a minimum, like at least I know we have to have at least 1 table. Is there like a requirement besides like, if like decide to do frequency tables with all of them? I mean, I'll make sure it goes with it. Like I'll make sure I look at the variable and see which one like will describe it best. But I guess my question was like, is there a requirement of how many tables you want us to have?
No, so you can alternate between tables and the bar graph.
Okay.
For qualitative, you know, you can do either or. So there is no minimum. You just have to have something for each one of your variables. So each one of your variables would be, you know, age. Let me just go back here real quick. Somebody had, let me go to chat here.
So my next question was following, I know the questions that we have to answer for them. For like example, like I know you had said like, if we notice any patterns, or like, you know, like we have to describe like the statistics and so on. Do we do that, a paragraph for each variable, I'm guessing? Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. So you're going to have the main section, which is EDA and then descriptive stats, right? That's your main heading. Just do an introduction real quick to that section. And then you're going to have a subsection for each of the variables. So if you go back and look at the sample paper, you notice that they have the main heading of, you know, unfortunately it's split into 2 parts, but we sort of combine those into 1 part. So you're going to have the main heading, and then you're going to have subheadings for each of the variables. And then that's where you put your table, your graph, and then you sort of describe what it is that you have there, and then sort of go into detail as far as the variable, as far as it pertains to the variable.
Okay. And then my last question, I promise. When it comes to the other program, I know during the last class you were showing us that weird graph looking thing that was like a line. It was like a box. It was like you did like a graph, and you said like only that other program was able to do.
Yeah. The box plot.
Yeah. What did we use that for? Because I was confused with that. Like
So that's for a quantitative variable, and so I can go ahead and show you.
Do we need
how to do that now? Yeah, you You can include that. But the only ones that will have that will be age and income.
Okay.
Because that's a quantitative variable visualization. So you're not going to have that for qualitative.
Qualitative. Okay, because I did a dive in a histogram for both my age and my income already. So.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, I can show you guys how to do that. Today. So if you guys need to see that, so you're welcome to include it. You don't have to include it if you don't want to. So it's entirely up to you. It does give. It is the 5-number summary, which gives you the minimum, the Q1, the median, the Q3, and the max. It also gives you an opportunity to display any outliers. And so you don't really have to do a calculation for that. You can just go ahead and do that graph and then click on, I think it says display outliers or something like that, or label outliers, and they'll give you the outliers for each of those 2 variables. If you have any, you might not have any, so.
Hey, Professor, really quick before you start class, I sent you the text. I shared that video that I'm talking about directly with you via text.
Okay, I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, you can do your class. I just want to make sure you got that.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay, good deal.
All right, so yeah, so that's the one. So that's the one. So I did switch up the format, the structure of the, well, not the structure, but the format of the course itself. And so those videos now are pertained either in the instructions or within the Zoom recordings and the files that I have. So it's slightly different.
Wait, what files are you talking about though? Because I've watched, like I said, I've watched some of the Zoom recordings, and some of that does clarify, but there's still questions like the quality, Xmora or Night, whatever. I don't remember who it was, whoever her name was, but there's still questions about that I had, she asked, but also in addition, there was, it goes over one of the instructions, and then I watched do I need to watch from the beginning of September? When did you start going over that? Because I only went from 9. Do you see what I'm saying? Because I feel like I missed some part, and I went through some of the Zoom things, but it didn't seem like any of the topics weren't part 3. And it was on, let me look at the section. It's in the Word doc.
So while you're looking for that, so chapter 2 and chapter 3 are the 2 chapters that will show you how to do the things that you need to do for part 3. Those are the only 2 chapters. So then that would be that would be the Zoom recordings, and then of course the files. So you can sort of go into the file and say, okay, this is how he did this. This is what that formula looks like, or this is how he, this is what it looks like in an Excel file as opposed to just from a video.
Okay, so where are those files at though, other than the Zoom recordings?
Those files, let me share my screen here real quick. So all of those files, all of the Excel files are within, so let me just, so here's the Zoom.
Right, I started at 9.9.
Yeah, so let's say you wanna, well, I don't think 9.9 I started with the files. I'm gonna go to 9.
That's just where I started, and I went through the beginning of October. I think I stopped at 10.5. I haven't done 10.5.
So let's say you're looking at 9/23, right? September 23rd. And there's a video, and I sort of talk about a file. I'm working on a file. So then what you do is you sort of scroll down, and if you look at the Excel file here, it says 9/23, 9/28. So these are the Excel files that pertain to the particular Zoom recording videos that are here listed. So the date on the Zoom recording, if it's the same date on the Excel file, then that's the Excel file that I use for that particular date.
Oh, okay. And that's the video of the Excel files.
Yeah. So then, so the Zoom recording, if I'm working on an Excel file, then that's it right there. The only thing that you're not going to see on a separate file would be the JASP file. So I started using that, I think, maybe 10.5, 928.
Well, yeah, I'm using Excel. I'm using Excel, so Jazz won't be a problem. But those are you're saying those stats things, those are the videos that you have of Excel of you showing, is that what you said? Okay. That's probably what I was looking for in regards to part 2, like those videos.
Yeah, so you have to go back, and I don't remember exactly, well, I guess I can see it here. So 914 is the first Excel file that I have. And so if you go back here, if you look at 914, so then that should be the first video that starts with chapter 2. So chapter 2 and chapter 3 are the 2 videos that are going to show you how to do every single table and every single graph that you need for part 3.
Okay, so it sounds like I didn't catch the files then. I didn't know those were the files that basically I was looking for about Excel and the examples that I need. So that's what I needed.
Yeah, no,
that makes perfect sense now that there's an Excel file that goes with the Zoom recording.
With the Zoom recording, yeah. So the instruction videos are sort of like a backup to what you're doing, and they sort of kind of go into a little bit of details, but the files that I use for there is one module that has an Excel file that's there, but then you would have to go, to that YouTube video and then of course to the file. But basically it's the same thing as the Zoom. So if I use an Excel file on 928, then there's a Zoom recording for 928, and then there's a file for 928. Since I started listing all the Zoom meetings in a module by itself, I sort of just kept up that format instead of switching it up and putting the Zoom recording with the file. I mean, it makes sense moving forward that I might do it next semester where I'll put the Zoom meeting and the file in the same module. But unfortunately for this one, I switched up the format, the layout of Canvas. And so for some odd reason, I did it this way for this term. So that's probably my fault that they're not kind of together. So, but did that answer your question, David? Was I able to?
Yeah, I think I got it. So basically the Zoom thing is like the recording, and then you have the examples in the file of like what we're talking about.
Yeah, so if you see something in the Zoom meeting that I'm referring to in Excel file, you go to that Excel file for that date and you'll see exactly what I did. And I mean, of course, it's going to be completed, but you can go through the Zoom and then kind of
right. But that format in the file, really quick, I just want to check. So I know that my data and like my wording may be a little different regarding like what I'm talking about. But like as far as like the format of like the heading and stuff that we see in the file, would that be the same typical APA format that we would use in our own? So I can basically take that and utilize it and just okay.
Your data is going to be different, and my expectation is that it is different, and so.
But the tables and formatting are the same, though.
Yeah, but the format of that is all the same. Yeah, you're correct. You're correct. So the only thing that I want you guys to be careful with is the new edition of APA switched up the caption for graphs. So in the previous edition of APA, the captions for the graphs were underneath, the captions for the tables were above. And so in the 7th edition, they switched everything to above. So you're welcome to look at the instruction videos for captions and stuff like that. That doesn't change, but just be aware that instead of putting it below for a graph, you have to put it above. So that's the only change there is there in APA. And Anne addressed that when she did the library instruction a few weeks ago.
Right, so just put the captions above the tables and graphs, right?
Yeah. But those instruction videos show you how to do it. Just remember that, it just have to be on the top. So.
Okay.
Are there any other questions pertaining to part 3?
Yeah, so I'm on video 923, and so far, like, that video we've done like age, gender, race, and all that, and income. So when is it that we'll actually start including our own information? Like what we collected data specifically for?
So you can do that in part 3, where you start describing the variables, because you're not just going to include the table and then that's it, right? So if you include a table for age, let's say one of the first questions that you asked that you copied, if you include a table or graph for that, then not only are you going to talk about what's on that graph or table, but then you're also going to describe your variable in more detail. And so this is your opportunity to sort of grab something from the outside, like a peer review source or something that sort of reinforces what you found, or maybe what you found is completely different, you know, than what this source says, which is okay because there's a sample, and so there's a probability that it is going to be different. And so this is a section where you sort of build that up. When you do hypothesis testing, and I forget what part number it is, you can go into a little bit more detail in that part. But this part and then the hypothesis testing part is where you sort of, you can pull things from the outside to sort of reinforce what you found or show that your sample is slightly different. So.
Okay, so is part 3 just like all demographics essentially?
So part 3 is, you're not only visualizing your data, but you're just describing it. You're just telling the reader what you found. And so when I was saying the opportunity to bring something from the outside, so let's just say that your topic is, I think Heather had guns. And so let's say Heather's topic is gun policy. And then so the narrative out there is that if you identify as a Republican conservative, that you are a proponent of the Second Amendment, right? So you support the Second Amendment in all its glory, right? For the sake of explaining this. But let's say that suddenly you start organizing your data and you find out that for the most part, even your participants that identify as Republican and conservative don't necessarily support gun rights or the Second Amendment at the same rate as, let's say, some source says, right? Of course, don't take the source from MSNBC or Fox News or anything like that, but let's say you found a peer-reviewed article that said that Republicans support the Second Amendment at a rate of, 85%. But let's just say that your sample, suddenly you found out that only 55% support gun policy and the other 45% don't. So then you might be able to bring something from the outside and sort of talk about why do you think it's only 55%, or let's say you do end up with about the same percentage as what the source says, then you can just use that to reinforce what you found. But you can also find something to sort of talk about why do you think it's different than what people feel it is, right? The same thing with abortion. And so the narrative is that people who identify as Republican, conservative, Christian, church-going, evangelicals will not support abortion rights, right? And so if you find out that the percentage is slightly different, right? Then that's something that you can talk about. Now, hypothesis testing, this is where you really test statistically whether there's a difference between what you found and what the national poll found. So going back to the gun policy question, the Second Amendment. So let's say the national poll had, 85% of Republicans support the Second Amendment, but then you found in your sample, you got 78% of Republicans support the Second Amendment. You can compare those statistically, do a test, and find out if statistically your results are the same as the 85%. Even though you're at 78%, I believe I said, there might not be a statistical difference between those two. And so that's what you're going to do. So that's why if you sort of introduce this in part 4, you can sort of segue into that. Now, you don't know what the results are going to be, which is okay until you do the test. But you've already kind of laid out the groundwork to sort of pick up where that test, the conclusion of that test is going to be.
Professor, really quick question about that. So like basing like off of what you said, wouldn't like the results always be different for the simple fact that like a national poll versus like some girl who has a bunch of friends, that's obviously gonna, or some person that has a bunch of friends, obviously that's gonna differ because of that, not because like in percentage or in data. Like
Yeah.
you said. So wouldn't that just be the logical response to that question, though, is my data is not aligned with or in agreement with the national poll or the statistics or the narrative. However, my group of people, the selection of people was also really narrow compared to the peer-reviewed source.
Yeah, so you're correct in saying that the sample, it is a convenient sample. So it is, you know,
Right.
to use the same terminology, you know, it is a little narrow in comparison to the general population. However, we can still statistically test them to see if it's statistically if it's the same as a national poll. We're able to do that using test. And so that doesn't change. That doesn't change whether or not you're a convenient sample. As long as your sample is greater than 30, which I think for the most part, everybody here has one that's greater than 30, then you can just test those, and you can see that statistically they're the same, or statistically they're not the same. So simply looking at proportions, 85% of the national poll, Republicans support the Second Amendment.
Right.
Heather's sample ended up at 78%. So she's going to test the 85 to the 78. Is there a statistical difference or there isn't? Well, and so that aspect of it, you can actually carry out and have a completely subjective conclusion to that question.
Wouldn't the conclusion to that question just be the statistical difference of 85 and 78% is the population of people that were surveyed? So whoever you just referenced, Heather, whoever it was, she only had like 60 people. This poll that's peer reviewed, or the national poll, had like 1 million or like thousands. So of course that would affect the percentage. So wouldn't that be the conclusion?
So the greater your sample, the more robust your conclusions are going to be. However, simply because you have a sample of 60 does not necessarily mean that you should be different or you should be the same. You just don't know. And so, for example, let's say you did your sample. I'm just going to go back to the most popular ones, right? Gun policy, and so you took a sample and you surveyed. You know, it was a convenient sample. You surveyed friends or whatever, and then you do the same sample. Let's say 6 months later. Chances are you're going to end up with a different sample. It might be close, but it might be different. And then, so is that difference enough to say that they're statistically different? So when we're talking about statistical differences, we're more talking about a mathematical difference between two samples, if you will, as opposed to saying, well, they are going to be different because there's a different sample. Well, that's sort of a given that they're going to be different because there's a different sample, but we're going to test it statistically to see if in fact they are different. So we can't just say they're different because they look different. Does that make sense?
Right, so, okay, I see what you're saying. Just because the numbers are different doesn't mean the narrative is different. It could still mean the same just because the numbers are different based on the sample. However, one thing that I find interesting is this is called convenient sampling, but somebody like, I don't know, like I'm Republican, you know, like I think Democrats are dumbasses. So I usually don't have friends or people that I associate with or even have talked to that are Democrats. So with that said, my sample and my information is heavily targeted towards Republicans because that's who I shared it with.
Yeah.
So when I say that, is my sample convenient or targeted? Well, and if it's targeted, does that change things in my data?
So the only way that it would be a targeted sample is if you said, okay, I'm going to send it to Johnny, I'm going to send it to Rob, I'm going to send it to Janet, I'm going to send it to, you know. But if you just put it out on your social media, or you kind of send it out and say, hey, can you take this? And you sort of opened it up and you didn't really specifically say, hey, I want Johnny to take it. Because if you do that, then your sample is not going to be a good sample because you targeted people that you feel have the same beliefs as you. But if you just sort of open it up and it is what it is, right? Most of your
Right.
friends are Republican, then it is what it is, right? It's a convenience sample. But
Okay.
but here's the deal though, like we can, you know, just because the majority of your friends are Republican and conservative does not necessarily mean that they're going to answer some of the questions the way that you think they should answer the questions. So.
I mean, yeah, valid point, but the general narrative would be the same. They just made
absolutely. But you know,
the narrative.
It's interesting because there's a lot of research that's showing that younger, even if they identify as conservative, younger conservatives tend to be a little bit more liberal when it comes to social issues.
Well, there's also data that shows a lot of like my generation and Generation Z and then Generation Alpha. Well, I don't know about Alpha. I can't speak on that because there's not much, but Generation like Z and like millennials are like the most uneducated when it comes to like politics, and they use more feelings and emotions rather than like educated thought and like critical thinking. That's evident in like the turnout from like younger people. So, but that's a different topic.
Yeah. I don't know, like I would have to see some research and data to sort of say.
I can send that to you. It's peer.
Yeah. Yeah. And so unfortunately people, when you say millennials, they think you're talking about 17-year-olds, and you're not. Right? Like the youngest millennial is probably in their 20s or something like that. The oldest millennials will be in their 30s. And so millennials is the generation after Gen X, sorry. And so they're not 17-year-olds. Everybody's bashing millennials, like, oh, the lazy millennials, but you know, they're really not. But I don't have data off the top of my head. That might go back to the sense that they are more socially liberal, like they don't really care who marries who, they don't care about marijuana, you know, they don't care about certain things that the older conservatives might care about. But that's not to say that fiscally they're the same as their parents, but they tend to differ as far as social issues per se. So that's the data, but I can't speak to where they make decisions that are uneducated, like because
no, I wasn't saying they're making decisions that are uneducated. When I said uneducated, I meant like they don't understand like politics, like parties, like the Democratic Party. They don't understand the history, the context, and everything behind the party to make an informed decision. They just look at the candidates and make a decision based off of like how they feel about them, their emotions about them. It's usually not about like an educated, like contextual, like education regarding like the history of it and then leading up to this candidate. You know what I mean? So when I say history, so that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about like they're making uneducated decisions. It's just they're uneducated regarding the whole thing in its entirety. Social media is a mass array of disinformation nowadays. So is the news.
Yeah. So yeah, if you have that, I mean, go ahead and send them to me. Like I'll be interested in
yeah, I'll send that. Yeah, I'll send that to you.
Yeah. So, you know, it's one of those things that we are pretty divided, and I think the left will say the same thing about, you know, conservative people, that they'll say, well, they're idiots and they make decisions based on blah blah blah. So, for me personally, I would need some data, some research for me to make an informed decision about whether or not I think that's true or not. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, you don't have to believe it. I'll send you the stuff that I found though.
All right, any other questions, comments?
Yes, Professor, I have a question. So everything that you guys were just talking about, that's actually bringing in other data. It's going to actually be in part 4, correct? It's not in part 3?
Yeah. Okay. So, well, no, for part 3, you can bring this information in and then sort of segue into the hypothesis testing part, which I think it's part 5. And so you can sort of introduce this information with your data, and then when you test it, you sort of piggyback on what you introduced in part 3. So you can go ahead and do it there. You can start doing it in part 3 and then kind of finish it off in part 5, I think.
But you don't have to bring it in part 3. You can bring it in part 4 if you like, right?
Part 5, because part 4 is the probability part.
Okay.
Yeah, part 5. Yeah.
So
part
I can bring it in part 5 and close it in part 5.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Just make sure that when you describe your variables, that it is entirely objective, right? So you're not bringing in your opinion. If you feel that you want to include an opinion in there, so then don't just say, I mean, going back to what David said, don't just say, you know, they make uneducated, they're not well informed about some of the fundamental.
Professor, that's not an
I'm bringing up an example. I'm not saying that you said this. You can't just say, you know, millennials are not well informed when they make a decision. You have to bring in some information from the outside. Does that make sense? You can't just say that. You need to have some backup to what you're saying. So that's the only thing you got to be careful with.
Yeah, no, all I was doing is during this part is explaining exactly what my data was giving. I wasn't bringing in any other part.
Yeah, that would be perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah, that would be perfectly fine.
And this is due on the 14th still, right?
This is due on the 14th. If anybody needs more time, I can stretch it out to maybe Friday or Saturday if you guys need more time. The only thing is that if I do extend the due date, I really don't start grading until after the due date closes. So if I stretch it to Friday, chances are I probably won't get to it until Monday, just to be honest with you guys. So just be aware of that. But if you guys need more time, we can have that discussion and change the due date if you guys want to do that. So, are there any questions as far as the details of making a graph, making a table, or anything else before I sort of kind of go back and sort of review 4.1 and 4.2 real quick?
Yes.
Yes.
So do we need a graph or a table for every single thing that we have, like the subheading thing?
Yes, so you're going to need a table or a graph for every qualitative variable. You're going to need the ogive, the histogram, and the frequency distribution table for your quantitative variables.
Okay.
Quantitative variables should be age and income pretty much.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, so last week I introduced the pivot tables, or in other words, the contingency table. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my Excel file with you guys. And so I created this pivot table. Now this table, you will not share this table in your Word document. You would just share the information that you found, right? So in this table here, and this is what's called a contingency table, and it's the easiest thing to break down the probability of you randomly choosing a participant that fits some criteria that you've laid out, right? And so what I did here was I chose 2 qualitative variables. So you can only choose qualitative variables. You don't do the quantitative because it's not going to put it in classes and things like that. You're just going to have a whole list of the different, data points that you have for either age or income. There's no way you're going to read that, so don't even do that. But for this table, you can see that here I have political identification and I have religious identification. And so you can see here that the probability of randomly choosing a Democrat for this particular sample would be 27 out of 62, right? And if I click on this here, you can see the formula and the formula bar up here. That's 44%. So what is the probability of me randomly choosing a Democrat from the sample? It's about 44%. And then in this one here, I chose spiritual. So what's the probability of randomly choosing a participant that's spiritual? And then so for that one, you see that it's 16 over 62. So if I go to the row of spiritual, I click on 16, it'll be 16 out of 62. So if you remember that your sample space is 62. Sample space is all the possibilities, right? And then here I chose an and question, right? So I chose, okay, what's the probability of randomly choosing a participant that is Democrat, right? Identifies as a Democrat and is spiritual. Has to have both of those criteria in order for it to be valid. And if you notice here, I got 9/62. So if you have an and question, what you're looking for is you're looking for the intersection of the column and the row, right? So I'm looking at the column of Democrat, I'm looking at the column of spiritual, and where do those two intersect? And in this one, it's 9. So 9 participants out of 62 are either Democrat or Democrat and spiritual. They have to have both of those criteria at the same time. And the second one, the next one that I did, it was the probability of Republican and Roman Catholic, right? So the probability of choosing a Republican and a Roman Catholic here, you can see that it's 7/62. Again, I'm going to go to the intersection of Republican, which is this column right here, and then the intersection of Roman Catholic, which is this column. And then I see that the intersection of those two is 7, and it would be 7/62. And that turns out to be about 11%. The next thing that I did was an OR question. Now, OR question is this formula that's right here. And this formula says that the probability of A or B is the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A and B. Now, if you think about what I said about the AND question, it has to have both criteria. So if I'm doing the probability of the first criteria plus the probability of the second criteria, then I'm really double counting. And so since I'm double counting, I have to get rid of one of those two counts. And so that's why we do the minus the probability of A and B. So that's the only difference between the or and the and. And if you notice here, for the probability of Democrat or spiritual, I did G19, right, which is the probability of Democrat. I did G20, which is the probability of spiritual. And then I did minus G21, which is the probability of Democrat and spiritual. So when you do the probability part, which is the next part, you got to pick 10 questions. You make up the 10 questions yourself. But when you make up the 10 questions, you can only have 2 simple questions. 2 simple questions would be, what's the probability of choosing a female? What's the probability of choosing a Democrat? What's the probability of choosing a Republican? Those are just simple probability questions. The rest of your questions have to be either and or given, which is conditional probability. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a conditional probability, right? So what's the probability of A given B, right? So the probability of A given B is the probability of A and B divided by the probability of B. And so this formula is a little different, right? It's a division problem, which, I mean, all of them are pretty much division problem. But so if I'm looking for the probability of A given B, what that means is when I put my hand in the bag and chose one, I already know it's B, right? But then what's the probability that if it's B, it happens to be an A also, right? And so that's what I'm looking for. And so if I go here and I say the probability of Democrat, given that they're spiritual, the nice thing about this is, I'm going to show you 2 ways of doing this, that I can use this formula, or I can just go ahead and use the table. So I'm going to show you doing the formula. So the formula would be the probability of Democrat and spiritual, right, divided by the probability of spiritual. So then I ended up with 56%, right? And so the next thing that I'm going to do is, if I'm doing the probability of Democrat and spiritual, then I can go ahead and go to this table and I can say, hold on a second, let me do a calculation here real quick. Oops. So, hold on a second. Probability of A. Probability of Democrat divided by the probability. I don't think that's it. Okay. Yeah. Sorry. I gotta let me rewrite this formula over here real quick. And so here, let me do this real quick. It didn't look right to me. So it's the probability of that divided by the probability of the Democrat, which is 0.33. So 33%, right? What's the probability that I chose a spiritual person and they also happen to be a Democrat? Well, the other way that I can do this without having to do this formula is I can look at the column of Democrats, right? And the intersection of Democrat and spiritual, which I have 9. So you can notice that I have 9 participants that are Democrat and spiritual. Well, if I do 9 divided by 27, this is the only time that your sample space changes. Every other time your sample space, for this example, will be 62. The only time your denominator changes is if you have a given question. And so you just have to be aware of that. So the probability of Democrat given spiritual will be the probability of Democrat and spiritual divided by the probability of Democrat. And so these are the 2 formulas that we can use. The table is actually a whole lot easier than trying to do the formula. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and show you again how to do a pivot table. So when you do a pivot table, you need to choose two qualitative variables. So I'm going to go ahead and do political identification. And I'm also going to use the affordable healthcare question. So I have these 2 questions. I have political party and I have healthcare more affordable. Before I do a pivot table, what I want to do is I want to highlight both of these columns. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click on insert up here. And then when I click on insert, you notice that I have pivot table all the way to the left. So if I click on pivot table, I get this menu. Now my raw data is already there. It's already telling me, hey, this is what you're going to look at. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in an existing worksheet. When I click OK, I can pick any cell, just pick one. You don't have to get all fancy. And then you click OK. When you click OK, it takes you all the way to your right. Here are your 2 variables. You're going to have to put one in the columns. Then you're going to have to put the other one in the rows, and then put either one of them in values. Doesn't really matter. Now, one of the things that I said this last time is whichever variable has the least amount of levels or the least amount of responses, you want to put it in the column. So you rather have your table be longer than wider. And so if you put it and you find out that your table is really wide but really narrow, just switch those up and then it'll fix it for you. The next thing you're going to do here is you're going to get rid of the blanks. And so this is what I have now. Now, let me just save this here real quick. Today is the 12th. So if you notice here, these are I have 1, 2, 3, I have 6 questions. So now I did this here. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some more questions. So I'm going to say the probability of someone being Democratic Socialist, or let's just say a top priority for healthcare, right? So if you remember this, the formula for this is going to be, so the probability of A or B is equal to the probability of A plus the probability of B minus the probability of A and B, right? So for this one here, I have to find the probability of a democratic socialist. So I'm going to go ahead and just do this one here because I need that one. And I'm going to do this one also, right? Because I also need that one. And I'm also going to do this one because I need that for this formula. So the probability of being a democratic socialist is going to be 3 out of 62. Right? And I'm just going to go ahead and put it, put 2 decimal places here. Oops, one more, and I'm going to just center this whole thing. And so the next one is the probability of having healthcare be a priority is going to be 46 divided by 62. And if you notice, I'm just using the table, right? And then the next one is the probability of democratic socialist and healthcare is a top priority would be 3 out of 62. And so once I have these 3, I can go ahead and do this one. So this is going to be the probability of democratic socialists plus the probability that healthcare is a top priority minus the probability of both of them. I get 74%. So the probability of me choosing a participant that's a democratic socialist or feels that healthcare is a top priority is about 74% for given this choice. Now, having said that, you can use this one as one of your questions, and you can use this one as one of your questions, but you cannot use the 2 simple ones as 2 of your questions. So then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do what's the probability of democratic socialists given that they feel that healthcare is a top priority. So if you notice, if you remember from before, we said it's going to be my sample space is going to change, and it's going to change into democratic socialists, right? So then what's the probability of choosing a democratic socialist given that I chose someone that says a top priority? It's going to be the 3 divided by the total of democratic socialists, right? Which is not that one, sorry. Hold on a second. Get rid of that. So this one's going to be equal to the 3 divided by the 3, which is 100%. Now, if you think about it, right, it makes sense because there were 3 democratic socialists and every single one of them said that healthcare is a top priority. So then that would be 100%, right? What's the probability of me choosing someone who feels that healthcare, the affordable healthcare is a top priority and they're also a democratic socialist? Well, if it fits both criteria, then it has to be 100%. This one also can be one of your questions, right? So if you think about it here, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I would need 1 more. And so you can just sort of say, okay, so what's the probability of choosing someone who says healthcare is a top priority and they're a democratic socialist? So in this case, again, it's going to be the 3, but it's going to change this time because it's going to be 3 divided by 46 because my denominator is going to change. And so that becomes 7%. And so this is how you find all of these questions, right? So you come up with these questions, you find the answer to the questions, and then you turn all of this into a paragraph for part 4. So when you list these questions, do not list them and don't bullet point them. Don't put them in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Everything has to be in paragraph form. What you can do is you can do one paragraph for each of the questions, or you can just do one paragraph where you include all of the different questions if you want to do that. Either one is acceptable.
So what you just showed us is for part 4, not for part 3. Okay.
What I just did is for part 4. Yeah. All right.
Professor, question.
Yeah, go ahead.
At the bottom where the bars are, is it supposed to be in a particular order? Because I noticed you put your probability bars at the end.
What do you mean by probability bars, Stephen?
So where you have age, histogram age, ogive age, gender, those different tabs, is it supposed to be in a particular order? Does it matter?
No, I just happen to, when I lay it out, I look at my raw data and then I sort of work from left to right.
Gotcha.
And so that's all it is. It just makes it, to me, it makes it a little easier, but you don't have to, because that Excel sheet is only yours. You're the only one that's going to see that. No one else is going to see that.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Questions, comments about anything? All right, so just before we wrap it up, how many people are going to need more time to do part 3? If I stretch it out to Friday, will that help you guys?
Yep. Thank you.
That'll help a lot.
All right, so I'm gonna do Friday, which is the Friday is the 16th. So let's do the 16th. I'm gonna go and change that date as soon as I end the meeting.
All right, so I just want to clarify, all the stuff that you just been talking about, is that stuff that we're adding in part 3 as well?
What I just did?
Yes.
So that's actually part 4.
Okay, good.
So we're a little bit ahead where your parts are due, simply because then you have time to ask questions, so sort of ask me to review things, and then you have to submit that part. So we're a little bit ahead as in terms of the sections and then where those sections go in your paper.
So what has to be in part 3? Sorry.
Say that again, Katie?
So what has to be in part 3?
So part 3,
I think I still have everything in part 2 on there, and I didn't get anything else on it.
So part 2 is just one paragraph. But part 3, you're going to have to list every single one of your variables.
Okay.
And then you're going to have to include the tables or the graphs, and then you're going to have to basically describe your variables objectively.
So every
So
Go ahead. I'm sorry. So let me just show you real quick. Let me share my Excel file here. So if I was doing this, right, and I'm doing part 3, every single one of these columns is a variable. And so when I do this work, I have to have every single one of these described with either a table, a graph, and then some writing and things like that. So so basically that's how you know. So each one of those columns, except the timestamp, you don't need the timestamp. So does that make sense?
So what you showed us.
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Noemi.
Like what you showed us last week, is that part of part 3 as well? Like today's when you started in part 4?
No, I started, I think I might have started Wednesday of last week. If I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think it was Wednesday.
Okay, so yeah, it was Wednesday when I first started doing this.
Yeah, because Monday you did Jasper.
Okay, that's right. That's right, yeah. Any other questions, comments, or anything before we end the meeting? So I'm going to change the due date to the 16th. If you run into any problems or anything like that, just reach out to me. It's due on the 16th. We do have some cushion there. So if the 16th comes and you're still struggling, just reach out to me, and then we'll go ahead and have that discussion just privately to see what we can do. So.
Is it easier for you to get Canvas message or a text message?
So text, well, I'll get it right away. Canvas, I have to log in order for me to see it. So if you're looking for a response, like, you know, within a reasonable amount of time, you can text me. If you need me to look at something, you can text and say, hey, can you look at this when you get a chance? And then if I'm not, you know, doing anything, I can just go ahead and log on to the computer. If I'm in the middle of something, I might not reply back to you, and then just wait until I have access to whatever it is that you're asking me to do, and then I'll reply back.
Okay.
All right. That's it. Okay. So I'll see you guys on Wednesday. I'm going to upload this Excel file, and then once the Zoom recording becomes available, I'll go ahead and post that too. See you guys on Wednesday.